True Q. John Delancey spends 45 minutes uncomfortably close to a young girl.
The Enterprise is delivering relief supplies to an ecologically devastated planet, and they have also taken on a girl named Amanda Rogers who is starting an internship on the Enterprise. Amanda is played by Olivia Dabo, who played Kevin Amold's sister in The Wonder Years, and she was also in Conan the Destroyer.
Riker is showing her around and takes her to her quarters, and I know people always express disbelief at the size of the rooms, but they are pretty freaking big.
And when I saw that it was Riker escorting her, I naturally assumed it would lead to a romance subplot.
Amanda mentions her dogs, and after Riker leaves, she turns around to a bunch of dogs in the room with her.
She says they can't be there, and they start disappearing.
Since this episode had Q in the title, I was half expecting John Delancey to be masquerading as a young girl to get some human experiences he hadn't had yet.
I also suspected that.
Like banging Riker.
Amanda reports to sickbay, where Beverly tells her to make sure all the tricorders are working.
They end up talking about Wesley and Jack, Beverly's dead husband.
And Amanda says she lost her parents at a young age, too.
Beverly says when Amanda is done testing the tricorders, she can take them down to the cargo bay for loading. Why don't they just beam everything, everywhere, all the time?
In this case, in the cargo bay, Geordi does say that they can't beam things down because of the ionization caused by the air filters used on the planet. While they're talking, her attention is drawn by Riker, and she notices a container about to create a sequel to Ethics. And Amanda waves her hand and causes the container to miss. Later, Geordi shows her around engineering and is impressed at her knowledge, even though she only mentions basic things that I would hope an intern would already know.
Over here is a Jeffries tube.
Where most of the major conduits are routed.
Oh, you've been doing your homework.
Suddenly, the core is about to explode, and it does, but Amanda pulls a Kamehameha and shoves it back in.
They have a meeting, and Riker asks if Amanda could be an alien, but Beverly says that doesn't appear to be the case.
And Q shows up in the middle of the meeting. He says he caused the core explosion to see if Amanda was truly a Q.
He says that her parents were Qs that took human form on Earth and had a child before dying in an accident, and explains that he was sent by the Q Continuum to help Amanda learn how to control her powers and then take her back to the Continuum.
And when Beverly starts arguing that Amanda wants her own life, Q whisks himself and Picard away.
Q tells Picard he wants him to be the one to introduce him to Amanda, and Picard reluctantly agrees.
And then Picard asks Data to investigate the nature of Amanda's parents' death,
because he doesn't believe that Q is being fully forthcoming. Amanda talks to Beverly about when her powers first began manifesting, and says she's glad she has an explanation now at least.
Q shows up and starts interrogating her, and says she should leave for the Continuum right now, but she doesn't want to, and throws his stunt double into a wall.
Q talks to Picard alone, where Picard asks what he's really there for, and he keeps saying the Continuum sent him to get the girl.
Amanda is in a counseling session with Beverly instead of, the counselor, and she is naturally conflicted, and not just because she's in a counseling session with Beverly instead of, the counselor.
She talks about her personal goals of going to the Academy and joining Starfleet, and how her powers will get in the way, but Beverly says she can't just run away from real life, and Q is the only one who can help her with her powers.
And Amanda says she doesn't want anyone to treat her differently, and for things to continue as normal.
Even though they now know she is a terrifying alien being. What if she has a dream about somebody where she's using her powers on them and she accidentally does it in real life while she's asleep?
And she already showed earlier when she was just thinking about dogs, a bunch of dogs appeared. What if she's in an argument and she says, "Man, you don't have to blow up like that," and then the person blows up. "You don't have to be so cold," and then that person turns into an icicle and then blows up. For the people choosing to watch these videos, kudos to you, but I don't know if I would.
We see Q walking through a hallway for some reason, and a shadow asks him for a progress report, where he says he needs more time, but they may not need to terminate Amanda after all.
Amanda asks Q what they are and what they do.
Anything we want.
She says she wants to know what her parents looked like, so Q tells her to just do it herself. And she does.
Q disappears, and Amanda goes to help Beverly with a bacterial vaccine that they are transporting. But she can't focus, because she's thinking about everything she's learned, and she tells Beverly about seeing her parents.
It turns into another counseling session, where Amanda doesn't know she's strong enough to accept what she is and what she can do.
And she asks Beverly what she would do if she could do anything. Beverly says she would want to heal people who are sick, but Amanda asks if she would bring her husband back. Beverly is uncomfortable and just tells her to focus on the work, and leaves.
Then Q appears and says it's time for another lesson, and directs her to increase the growth of the bacteria so they don't have to wait as long.
The people from the planet contact the Enterprise and tell Picard that they are having problems with the reactor powering some of the filters on the planet.
They have to switch the wrong way, so it's actually sucking in instead of blowing out.
Data tells Picard that Amanda's parents were killed in a tornado in Kansas.
And Picard says that's impossible because we don't have tornadoes in the future.
And he tells Data to go find more info. But Data's a robot, and we've seen how fast he can look through things. Are they waiting for information being relayed from another planet or something?
Riker goes to check on the bacteria growth, and Amanda gets all flustered since she's attracted to him.
And says he can stick around if he wants, but he says he's going to go look for Beverly.
Beverly then comes in, I guess they didn't see each other in the hallway, and says that the Q work done on the bacteria made the experiment useless.
And they'll have to do it over again. She yells at Q for interfering, so he turns her into a dog, but Amanda ends up turning her back. Data tells Picard that the tornado that killed Amanda's parents was unusually small and powerful.
Q and Amanda play hide-and-seek on the ship to practice her teleportation, and I was not a fan of her Q motion with her arms. It seemed overly complicated and dumb.
I liked it.
You would. Yeah, how are your semaphore lessons going? I can't tell what you're saying because we're doing this over a recording session.
At one point, they end up on a green screen of the outside of the ship, and Amanda is in awe of being out in space. And when they go back to her quarters, Q says she could have anything she wanted and have experiences that humans could never give her, even though they could have just beamed her out onto the hull.
Later, she goes to dinner with Beverly and Troy, and that made me even more annoyed, because I assumed Marina Sirtis was off doing something else during this episode, and that's why no counseling was going on. But it turns out it was just dumb writing.
Amanda is much more confident and happy than before, saying she's starting to enjoy herself. But when Riker comes by and Amanda asks him to stay and eat with them, he says he's busy, and moves one table down, revealing that he has a date. He doesn't even suggest moving to a table that isn't right next to Troy. How thoughtful.
So Amanda cues them both off the ship to a private location.
Riker tries to get her to take him back, saying that none of it is real, and she can't make someone love her. But then she waves her hand and makes him love her.
But then feels bad and realizes that it's all empty and sends him back because she hangs out there to cry.
Picard asks Q about Amanda's biological parents and whether they were executed by the Q continuum. Q says it doesn't matter because if she is a Q, she must go back to the continuum. And if she is a Q-human hybrid, which there doesn't seem to be any reason to think that she would be because that doesn't make sense, he must destroy her because as a Q, he has a responsibility to prevent omnipotent beings from running rampant through the universe, like he already does.
The Enterprise reaches the planet, and Picard tells Beverly and Troy about Q's decision and that they need to tell Amanda.
Picard talks to Amanda alone and tells her the truth about her parents' death, and she calls Q out, asking what right they have to decide whether she should live or die.
Q says they're the moral guardians of the universe, but Picard speculates that humans fascinate the continuum so much because they have the one thing that the Q lack.
A moral center.
Q says the continuum has decided not to harm Amanda, and they let her choose to either go back to the continuum or to stay as a human and not use the powers of the Q.
He says her parents were given the same choice, but they failed to hold off on using their powers, and that's why they were killed.
Picard gets called to the bridge for an emergency message from Riker, who says the new tech Geordi came up with is not enough.
And thousands of people are going to die if the reactor fails.
Picard asks Q if he caused that, but he says not this time, and disappears, which probably means he was lying.
Suddenly, the reactor stabilizes on its own, and the atmosphere of the whole planet miraculously clears up.
Picard turns to Amanda, who says she couldn't just let everyone down there die.
She says she can't deny what she is, and calls Beverly to hear her speech, and I'm glad Beverly wasn't in the shower or something, although I think you probably would have enjoyed that.
And Amanda says she is a Q and realizes she can't stay, but will go to talk to her adopted parents first, who she hasn't consulted with at all throughout this entire episode, even though she could just beam them in if she wanted to.
And then she and Q both Q away. True Q. Overall?
It's about time we got a good episode for Season 6, and surprisingly, it was a non-comedic Q episode. I'm glad they have so far managed to keep coming up with interesting directions to go in for Q episodes, at least most of the time. I still don't find Q himself very interesting, but Amanda, while a bit flat at times, which I think was somewhat Olivia Dabo's performance, was a sympathetic character, and the information we got about her parents and the Q continuum was interesting. Amanda's attraction to Riker wasn't really developed enough, and it was a bit out of character for Riker to just brush off her interests so quickly. I liked the part that Beverly played in the episode, but like you said, it would have made more sense for Troy to be the one doing all that stuff. She didn't even use her empathic abilities at any point. The stuff with the problems on the planet, I thought was surprisingly involved, even though we barely actually got any of it. It seemed like they thought it out, but then they barely put it in the episode. I wish that had played a bigger part. They could have had the arguments about how the people on the planet were handling things be a counterpoint to Amanda trying to make her decision, or about abuse of power or something, which could have tied back to Q's role as well, but they just left it in the background. I wish they had gone a bit more into what Amanda's decision one way or the other would mean for her in a practical sense, instead of just talking about how she felt about it. But I feel like the writers don't actually want to develop things about the Q continuum too much because they don't actually have it figured out. This could have been a better episode, but I still thought it was decent. I gave it a B-.
I also gave it a B-. It was an interesting concept, and we haven't had a Q episode in a while. I also prefer Q in kind of dick mode instead of trying to be funny mode. And I was hoping for some more background on the Q, but I agree with you that the writers don't really seem to know what they want for that. Amanda's almost immediate response to doing whatever she wanted once she realized she was a Q seemed a little out of character for how she was initially presented, of being so level-headed. I think it was too much too fast. And her final test, being immediately after her decision to remain outside of the continuum, was pretty silly. I also agree this was the first halfway decent episode of this season, but I still feel like this season doesn't really have any direction yet. And this is episode 6. It's a step in the right direction at least. Like and subscribe. You don't have to.
If you don't want to, just go to our Patreon page instead.
For those people who aren't listening anymore, Robert will now communicate in semaphore what you can do.